Welcome to our second international panel of the day. And we have three really great speakers to explore the theme digital accessibility education, research into practice. So each panelist will be presenting for 10 minutes, which will give us time at the end for a Q&A at the end of the session with all of the panelists. Just a reminder to please use our Zoom Q&A button. That's at the bottom of your Zoom screen if you wish to submit a question to any or all of our speakers. So I'm delighted to welcome our first panelist, Dr. David Sloan. David is Chief Accessibility Officer at Vispero and Practice Manager for User Experience at TPGi, which is Vispero's digital accessibility consultancy. He joined them in 2013 after 14 years as a digital accessibility researcher, instructor and consultant at the University of Dundee, where he completed his PhD on the impact of web accessibility audits. He is co-author with Sarah Horton of What Every Engineer Should Know About Digital Accessibility, and that's just been published by CRC Press. So David, over to you.
Thank you, Andy, and thank you, everyone. So, thank you for the opportunity to participate in this session today. It's interesting being part of an international panel session. I'm from Scotland, although I now live in the US. I've been here for 2 years. It's almost like international boundaries no longer really matter in terms of figuring out where I am and what I do and how I connect to everyone else in the community. But lovely to hear some familiar names in the recent discussion, and lovely to hear the mention of Dundee University in Jane's keynote there. So I'm going to talk about the consultancy perspective on digital accessibility, knowledge and skills. And I'm speaking as somebody who's been in the field of digital accessibility for over 25 years now, roughly the first half of that in academia and the second half in consultancy. So I feel like I'm seeing both sides of the coin. And the other aspect of both sides of the coin is that working for Vispero, that's a company that produces the assistive technology used by disabled people to be successful when interacting with technology. And we provide the consultancy that helps organizations and individuals build websites, mobile apps, documents, other digital resources in a way that allows them to be usable by people who use assistive technology. So again, we get to see both sides of the picture there. And we also are very aware of what we might consider the accessibility skills gap in terms of the information that we're asked to provide people, and also the information that our own team have, or the knowledge and skills that our own team have. So what does a digital accessibility consultancy get asked to do by our clients and by other organizations? Well, I guess the most common thing is accessibility audits. The question, tell us what's wrong with our digital resource. Tell us if it complies with a given standard or piece of legislation or regulation. So often that's the first point where we're coming in to tell people where they've gone wrong, point out the accessibility barriers present in their digital resource. That might also extend to providing remediation advice, and often that's a very technical engagement and support in providing that. We may get the opportunity to conduct design reviews. That is to say, we're reviewing an early prototype, a visual design of something before it's been built. And that's a much better way to provide accessibility feedback in a way that will influence what goes forward in the building of the product. So rather than testing something that already exists and is out there and causing some users difficulties, we're reviewing something that's in the process of being built. It's a much more efficient way to provide accessibility support. We are also asked to perform usability reviews with people with a range of disabilities. Again, that's a slightly more mature perspective from our clients, where they're concerned about whether somebody with a disability can use a digital product for its intended purpose, which shifts the conversation on from does it conform or comply with a particular standard to can people use it. We're also asked to provide training, again, trying to plug that accessibility skills gap by providing training to different roles, whether it's general training or specific for developers or designers or QA testers or product managers, training on specific technologies or training on specific topics, whether it's disability etiquette or doing user research with disabled people. These are all topics that, depending on our clients' awareness of their own skills gaps, we may get asked to provide in more frequent or less frequent quantities. And then we're also sometimes engaged in providing organizational accessibility strategy support. So things that help an organization move along the accessibility maturity continuum, helping them become more capable in delivering accessible digital products and services in a more sustainable way. And that might be advice and support in improving the software development lifecycle so that accessibility is injected into that life cycle in an efficient and effective way. We might advise on communication strategy, talking about your digital products accessibility, seeking feedback from people with a range of disabilities, responding to that feedback by improving the product and keeping people informed and supporting them while a product has issues that haven't yet been remediated. We might advise on procurement, given that so many digital products are the result of often complex supply chains where parts of that product are technologies from a third party. How do you manage accessibility in those third party relationships and other specialist topics? And it is important at this point to recognize that any organization that approaches a consultancy like us already have a sense that they need something that they don't have. Immature organizations who don't know much about accessibility at all, and maybe will start by asking us to test their website for accessibility issues. But then there are more mature organizations with pretty strong accessibility leadership, where accessibility is a big part of company culture, but they still have limited resources. So they choose strategic partners, and they're different kinds of relationships where we're almost providing tactical support to an organization that has more stronger awareness of what they need to do and how they need to get there. So all of these demands for services help us define what kind of knowledge and skills an accessibility consultant needs to have. And obviously there's a technical understanding of accessibility standards and test procedures, how to test against accessibility requirements in as an objective way as possible, and how to communicate those results in an effective way to our clients. And then there's the knowledge of accessible development tools and techniques. How do you help people remediate issues that we've identified through an audit? Then there's understanding of disability and how people with a range of disabilities use digital resources. There's, again, the strategic knowledge and skills, an understanding of relevant policy and standards and how things are changing. And that's obviously something that we're very aware of in the US right now with the new administration in the White House. Organizational transformation, accessibility can be something that is treated as pretty much as a project, something that we do it once, we don't need to worry again. Well, you're just going to make the same mistakes over again. So we need people who understand what's needed to change how organizations line up to building digital products and services, and help them make those changes so that they're going to maintain accessibility over time. And part of that building capacity with organizations includes teaching, transferring knowledge from us to our clients, mentoring, helping people who are already accessibility specialists in our client organizations build those skills, give them support when things aren't going well. We often find the one person who knows about or cares about accessibility at our client organization is the person who has to do all the work without having the authority to make changes. So being trusted advisors and helping our clients grow their capacity is really important. We want our relationship with our clients to evolve. We don't want to be selling them accessibility audits year on year. If we do that, we've failed. We haven't helped them move on in terms of maturity. So how do we acquire our knowledge? Well, obviously, as an accessibility consultancy, we need to hire people who have an understanding of accessibility. Generally, we don't have many entry-level positions with occasional exceptions, but we do build and share knowledge, whether it's through desk research, reading things, attending events, and learning from our peers, asking in the community. We heard that the last conversation about social media was very interesting because it has become more of a challenge. I would add to the list of resources that are maybe slightly safer spaces just now, the accessibility Slack community, Blue Sky. A lot of people are moving over to Blue Sky and kind of recreating Twitter as how it was maybe 10, 15 years ago. Lived experience, many of our team are disabled, so they have obviously very strong and valuable perspectives to share in terms of what are effective solutions to problems. Prototyping and testing. We do a lot of trying things out and seeing if it works to solve a problem, and documenting and sharing that advice and getting feedback and evolving things. So there's a lot of internal knowledge sharing, as well as with and between the wider community of accessibility specialists. So to finish, what do we need from accessibility educators? Well, from an accessibility consultancy perspective, we kind of fill the gap that exists in the world in terms of digital accessibility knowledge and skills. So I can answer this question in two perspectives. What do we need to hire more accessibility consultants? But what needs to happen so that we are not needed to provide some of the more basic and foundational services that we offer? Obviously, technical skills in accessibility across a wide range of platforms, transferable skills as well, so that we're not teaching people only how to do accessibility in one particular platform. The people skills, the ability to find things out, to ask questions, to understand what the problems are that need to be solved and what the problems that don't need to be solved are. The empathy, whether it's for people with accessibility needs or for people who are trying to advance accessibility in the constraints of an organization as limited budget, resources, time, or limited interest in accessibility. So having that persuasive aspect and encouragement is really important. Understanding what people with different audiences need and helping others interpret information to make the right decision in accessibility. Sometimes we're so focused on giving people all the information that it's very difficult for them to decide, well, what do I do with this information? What do I do first? How do I prioritize things? We don't want people to be stuck, unable to move because they can't decide what to do first. We need to be able to, we need people who can help them do that. And just that kind of rounded understanding of how accessibility influences and is influenced by organizational culture and practice. So, and I think that the last thing I would say is, obviously, we want to ensure that learning environments are themselves accessible so that more disabled people become accessibility professionals. It's still a very awkward reality that most people in accessibility consultancy are not disabled, and that needs to change. And anything that we can do to bring more disabled people into the accessibility profession is the better from my perspective. So I'll stop there, and if there are any questions, I'd love to answer them.
Thank you, David. That's great. So we will be doing questions once all the speakers have spoken. So that was really great, David. Great to hear that consultancy perspective. So our next panelist is Jade Matos Carew, who is actually joining us from a holiday in Moldova. So we're particularly grateful for her joining us today. So Jade is Head of Accessibility, Usability and User Research at the Open University, looking after the team responsible for accessibility evaluations, advocacy, governance, training and guidance. Jade is an educational professional with a wide background in teaching, in teacher training and inclusion. She has certificates in product, project and change management and an MA in special educational needs and disability. And she's an EdD researcher focusing on accessibility education. So it's over to you then, Jade. I believe I am going to share your slides. So I will do that now.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the introduction and for inviting me to speak today. I am still really early on in my research journey. I'm a second year on the professional doctorate at the Open University, the second of maybe about 5 years, I'm hoping. And the professional doctorate is really context-based, enabling me to kind of put research into practice. And the research that I'm interested in is how we educate our staff when it comes to digital accessibility or accessibility more broadly at the Open University. I thought I'd go through some of that context in a little more detail. Could you move on to the next slide, please? So if you're not aware, the Open University is based in the UK. We are the largest higher education institution, and accessibility is really at the heart of everything we do, especially our mission and values. So our mission is to be open to people, places, methods and ideas, and we promote educational opportunity and social justice. When it comes to our disabled students, we actually have over 36,000 students who have declared a disability, which is really quite high. That number could, of course, be even higher if we consider that not everybody will have declared a disability. People might not know that they have a disability. So at the Open University, especially in the academic space, we really try to promote being accessible by design, so being anticipatory rather than reactive. And this is something that's been happening for a while in the academic space. And more recently, we've focused lots of attention on accessibility when it comes to our staff, our disabled staff as well. So really pushing for thinking about being accessible by design in those professional services, for example. So anything that isn't student facing. Could you move on to the next slide, please? Yes, brilliant. So the staff experience and the staff's knowledge and education about accessibility is where I'm focusing my research. And a little more about our OU staff. Like all institutions, we're really complex. We have a dispersed staff of around 10,000. That includes both academic and professional services. It's important to note that most of us are based remotely, dispersed all around the UK. We have the usual, when you get into a large organisation, we have the usual siloed ways of working, everyone off doing their own things. We have lots of news and information, 1 million emails a day. How does accessibility stand out in that context? And we also have, I think it's important to note that we have training fatigue. I think lots of us have like mandatory training or compliance training, these modules that we have to click through and get a certificate at the end. Again, how do we make accessibility stand out in that space? I think most of us would agree that accessibility is a bit different than, adhering to GDPR. So I'm really interested in making sure that staff have a real an appreciation for digital accessibility, and it stands out in a slightly different way from the other areas of compliance training. Could you move on to the next slide, please? Thank you. Another important piece of context, I think, is that we do think positively about accessibility at the OU. There's so much to do. It's almost like there's just a massive mountain of work to do, but it's important to acknowledge that so much has already been done, and there's so much going on at the moment. I always say that we shouldn't eat an accessibility elephant whole, and it's really important to acknowledge those small but potentially really powerful steps, even if they're really incremental and everything moves so slowly. The OU does think positively about accessibility. We have a dedicated accessibility team, which is the team that I look after, and we sit within a wider design team that's focused on designing and developing websites and systems with user-centered design principles at the core of our work. As a team, we've got our fingers in lots of accessibility pies. So we look after standards, we look after accessibility as part of digital governance, and also advocacy as well. There are many wonderful people at the OU who work on lots of different initiatives, which a lot of them are OU-wide, and these are designed to foster and embed best practice. We have lots of well-established networks and communities. My team in particular, we create lots of guidance and we curate lots of guidance. We deliver training for different types of staff and for different levels of knowledge. So our ethos is really to empower people with what they need to bring about change, and we try and do that in a really positive and proactive way. Why is this important? Well, as much as we are positive and proactive, it's not necessarily the most sustainable model. So this is where my research comes into play. If you could move on to the next slide, please. Thank you. As I said before, I'm really early days into, well, I think I'm really early days into this research. I should probably get cracking a bit more quickly. So my research is really, the aim is I'd like to offer the education we provide to staff in a more organised and sustainable way. So I think it's quite difficult in a large organisation to have this kind of teacher-student or teacher-participant model when it comes to accessibility, especially when you've got 10,000 staff members who all need to have some level of knowledge when it comes to accessibility. So I'm kind of exploring different ways of how we can deliver self-directed learning or autonomous learning, and especially that learning at scale as well. So really moving from a pedagogical model to more bringing in ideas of andragogy and how we can design learning to make it really effective when it's self-directed. Also bringing into the mix, thinking about who's delivering that learning or that training and how we can support them. So there's there are lots of wonderful accessibility specialists, and we've got some great ones working at the OU, but they're not necessarily teachers. So whilst they know their subject, they might not be trained teachers. So how can we support them to deliver training, whether that's delivering training to a group or whether it's designing training that we can use at scale. At the heart of my research is the idea of community and social learning. So we've built these communities and these networks. How can we operationalize them to deliver learning? And I'm also interested mainly in the practical application of learning as well. And there's a great example of something we do at the OU on the next slide. So we're just about to launch this next week. It's called our February 4-week Fixathon. If you use that name, it's a great name. Just give us a little credit at the OU. It's a low-key approach to training, and it's focusing on helping our staff members create accessible Word and PowerPoint documents. It's based on accountability partnering or body doubling. So we match staff members from around the OU with a partner, and together they go off on a journey of going through our guidance. It could be any staff member. Of course, this has a wide reach. Everyone's creating documents. And we, as a team, we offer scaffolding at different touch points. So for example, we host drop-ins, we have a dedicated Teams channel, and we kind of really it's a community event, so everyone can ask and answer questions, and we really build a supportive environment for the whole of February. It is autonomous learning. It's self-guided, but you get the motivation of a partner along the way. And we also, at the end of the month, it's wonderful because we have people who have fixed their documents. Maybe they've been needing to dedicate some time for a while to fixing their documents. Maybe they've just brought along a new document. So at the end, we have a bit of a show and tell, and everyone's showing off their wonderful, accessible documents. And it's this kind of thing is a really great, it's a practical application of learning. So instead of sitting and clicking through a boring PowerPoint training where you learn about Microsoft Word, this is something which enables people to get their hands on a document and actually learn how to make it accessible. So this is the kind of thing that I'm really interested in measuring, the community angle, the sustainable learning. And there's just one more slide. I've found a framework that I'd like to have a look at. It's called the Value Creation Framework. And I'm hoping to be able to use it to evaluate the value of the learning, which is enabled by community involvement and their communication. So we can link specific acts within value creation cycles to their outcomes and then measure their effectiveness. And I'm hoping that if I can deploy this framework and use it to measure things like engagement, motivation, that we can then use it proactively, and we can plan activities which create value and perhaps remove or limit any activities that don't. And I think this is really important for accessibility educators, especially those who are working in, we have a full-time job, we're auditing websites, we're designing, we're doing all of the things, don't necessarily have very much time to dedicate to training. So something like this, having reliable, accessible and evidenced approaches to training activities could be really important, not just at the OU, but for promoting more widely in the community. I think I've covered everything there. Of course, happy to answer questions during the Q&A.
Thank you so much, Jade. That was really interesting. Really great to hear of your work and your study there. And obviously, I'm sure we'll all wish you best of luck with that moving forward. So our final panelist today is Ana Maria Iglesias Maqueda. Ana has been a member of the Computer Science Department at the Carlos III University of Madrid since 1999. She obtained her doctorate in computer science there in 2004. She's also been a member of the Spanish Center for Captioning and Audio Description from 2005 to 2013, and is the person in charge of the database around those, and the main researcher in the accessibility in education line. Her main research interests include accessibility, adaptive intelligent educational systems, human-machine interaction or readability, and information retrieval. So welcome to you, Ana.
Thank you, Andy, and good afternoon to all of you, and thanks for this opportunity to be here. So during the last 10 years, I've been very, very focused on how to build not just computers, but also robots. I'm very focused on robots in an accessible way for being used for all the people. So one of my challenge is how to teach what's accessibility for the designers and the developers of this technology. So let me check how to change. I'm trying to change there you go. Okay, so we know that there are robots all around in health services, home and industry. So we have different kind of robots with different interfaces. And it is quite challenging to try to be accessible for all people with different kinds of disabilities and abilities. The idea is, are we all able to interact with the robots that we are building under the same conditions and well, we're talking about universal design, but with robots, accessibility, designs for all, inclusive designs, in human-robot interactions. And we can see here on the right, like a robot. This robot is called Now Robot. I don't know if you know, it's a commercial robot. And the way this robot is usually interacting with the people is with the movements and with their voice. But what happens if the person who is interacting with is a person with hearing disabilities? This person has very big problems and accessibility barriers when is interacting with it. So I started to work in this area when in an European project in a seventh framework program from the European Commission, and it was a lot of people was trying to build a clinic assistant robot for comprehensive geriatric assessment. And they contact me once they have the first prototype, and that prototype was completely functional, and they try to prove or to test this robot in a clinic, and they realize that none of the other adults in the clinic were able to interact with the robot because this robot was not accessible at all. The robot just interact through the voice, so a lot of people with hearing disabilities couldn't interact with it. Then they didn't take into account the motor disabilities because this robot was also very, very fast for some people, and the people couldn't follow the robot, and a lot of things more. So we were working in 3 different tests of for the geriatric assessment: the Get Up and Go, the Bartel test, and the Mini Mental test. And the 3 different tests had different characteristics. One of them is to ask questions to the user, so they need to choose between 2 or 3 possible answers, but some of them had cognitive disabilities and they couldn't remember the first answer when the robot finished the question. And so they had a lot of problems with accessibility barriers. So I started with that in 2015, and then after 5 years, we built a robot that could be used in the clinical centers for geriatric assistance. But after they realized that if you are not building an accessible robot, then that robot is not able to be used by people with hearing, motor, or visual disabilities or cognitive disabilities. So that was fun. So since that day, we are collaborating in every robot they are building, in every project they are working on. So this is on the left. This one of the projects. One of the tests for that, it is called, the test is called Get Up and Go. So the idea is the robot is talking when this screen is shown on the display, and then the person needs to follow the robot to one point and go back and sit again, just to test the balance of the other people. So that's the idea. But the problem is that on the screen, the captioning was not displayed. So a lot of people couldn't access to that information. A lot of people had problems understanding what the robot want them to do. So this is just one sample. Let's stop in here because I want to be fast. I have a lot of things to tell you. So it's just one. one example of problems with this kind of test. So we detected accessibility barriers like the low volume, so people with hearing disabilities couldn't understand what the robot was saying, or people with cognitive disability, they didn't understand the initial explanation because it was too complex to remember, or they have a lot of problems, and there I put some of them. And so, for instance, the tablet was too small or was not positioned in a good position for depending on the person, because sometimes it was too low or too high. So we found a lot of accessibility barriers on here. Well, I was just talking. Let me go quickly through all these images. This is the other test we were working with. This test is assessing the functional level of independency of the person. And we found here a lot of, again, more accessibility barriers. Oh, well, I think this video is not working. So, this test, the idea is to ask a lot of questions to the users, and the users need to answer one of the possible, choose one of the possible answers that the robot provides to the users. But the problem is that sometimes people with, they were older people and they couldn't remember all the possible answers. So that was one of the first accessibility barrier that we found. And so we need to re-implement all these tests when I started to work with them. And when I, let me go faster through all these accessibility barriers. When I started to work with it, I realized that there are very clear accessibility guidelines related to accessibility and computers, and also accessibility and mobile phones, for instance, or other kind of applications, but there is nothing related to accessibility and robots. So at that point in 2015, so what we did, well, with the other tests, we also found a lot of accessibility barriers, and we tried to find some solutions. This remote control that is so big, it was one of our solutions with physics buttons, and it's one of the buttons that you can see in that image, the yellow, the blue, and the red, and they were related to the information that they found on the display on the chest of the robot. Its answer is in a different color and with a different shape, and also they could write in a tablet their answers if they prefer, because the speech communication, automatic speech recognition system was not so good at that moment. So we did try to communicate through writing or pushing some buttons. So that was our solutions. So what's my challenge, or what's the goal, is to try to create universal design interfaces for robots also, because now we know that we can find robots all around. What happens if we find a robot, or we install a robot in an airport, and it's trying to help the users, just like an information robot, or in a hospital. So this could benefits to everyone, not only for people with permanent or temporary disabilities, but also depending on the context of use. For instance, in noisy environments, it's similar when you are having hearing disabilities, or foreign people is similar when we're trying to talk. You can see my accent is not the best. So I'm feeling like I'm having a disability with the English language, or I'm a person with disabilities actually, and I'm working on this. So I feel really, really motivated with it. When you go to the dentist, you cannot speak in the same way, or all of us had been experimenting the sun in our screens with, and we cannot see anything like visual disability or motor disabilities. So what I recommend, usually what I'm trying to do with the companies or in the projects that I'm working in, is to participate, to try to design in a participatory with a participatory methodology, involving the users for the very beginning in the design of the robots. So that's the recommendation that I usually try to tell. And what I also recommend is that the team that is involved on that participatory design must be multidisciplinary, not just people, not just technical people, but also people with user experience, or experts in user experience, or experts on usability and accessibility, engineers and technicians, also people with disabilities, of course. So when we're talking about the accessibility of robots, of course, it's about the software of that robot. That software should be accessible for all. The interface should be accessible for all. But also we need to choose which are the hardware components we're going to use for that interface. And not just that, but also the robot's behavior. 2 years ago, I was in Texas in the in the Institute of Robotics in Texas, and we were working a lot about how the robot should behave when the robot finds a person with visual disabilities and the blank stick. So that's also something that we need to think on, and also the robots look and feel and everything. It's a lot of things to think on, not just the hardware or software. And let me go further. So when I usually...
Sorry to interrupt, Anna, if we can just be wrapping up in another minute or two, so that would be great, so we can have a...
Okay, sorry, yeah.
No problem,
so
thank
much
you.
things to do this, yeah. Okay,
Thank
the
you.
only thing is that when I go to the companies, or I try to convince the engineers to do accessible things, I usually provide them this kind of guidelines that I created for it, like tables mapping the interaction components with the different disabilities. Is just something that I made. And also I was working in 3 different areas, include accessibility like a success factor that influences the robot integration in the society, propose a new methodological framework including accessibility as a factor. This framework is called USUS, and we also create guidelines and recommendations for inclusive design. So later on you can find all these some papers and some projects we have been working on, for instance, a robot in a resident home, or a robot. Here, this is the evaluation framework, including accessibility as a new evaluation factor in one framework that already existed. And we have also papers on that. And here are some examples of the guidelines that we have been creating for it. With you can find more information on that paper there. And yeah, just a lot of challenges on this side. Just teach the robots teams to understand the accessibility barriers, understand the needs of the users, identify the accessibility barriers, and also try to solve that barriers, and how to use the Igelsias framework and all these things. So a lot of things to do yet, and open for new collaborations. So if you're interested, yeah.
No, that's great. Thanks so much, Anna. That was really interesting. Great to hear about your work, and good luck with everything moving forward. So much to take in from this session. We do have about 10 minutes for questions, which is great. So do keep them coming. We'll try and fit a few in if we can. I do have one, and thanks for Jade. I think she answered one of the questions already. I do have a question from Mike, which I'm assuming is directed mainly towards David. So he asks, won't a commercial consultancy only become involved when the customer sees a commercial need to make a profit? So how does that address the needs of disabled people who are poor and also don't add to economic growth? So do you want to take that one on, David?
Yes, I can address that one. I mean, I guess the first thing is, I mean, we can certainly have a debate about whether in an ideal world there's a need for digital accessibility consultancies. But the reality is there's a knowledge and skills gap that needs to be filled. And at the minute, we're there to fill it. As I said on the slide, our goal is always to evolve our relationship with anybody that we work with so that they're less reliant on our input and more capable of delivering accessibility to whoever uses their digital products. And ultimately, our goal is really to put ourselves out of a job, or at least fundamentally change how we help our clients. But I think there is an assumption that a commercial consultancy is only involved when a customer sees a commercial need to make a profit. That's not true, because we also work with publicly funded organizations, whether they're providing healthcare or education or government, who may have other drivers to provide accessible digital resources, whether it's legal or regulatory obligations, or just the desire to widen their audience. So yes, obviously money talks, but also we work a lot with publicly funded organizations in the United States. There's a mandate for all state and local government funded agencies and programs to implement accessibility requirements for web and mobile app accessibility for larger organizations by April next year under the ADA Title II regulations. So that's a big driver this year, and that's likely to see an increased demand for support in meeting those organizations. But I mean, certainly I acknowledge that people who are poorer may still be left behind as part of a bigger closing the digital divide conversation that we want to be part of. But ultimately, at the same time, we're governed. The work we do is governed by who comes to us and asks us to do that work. So the best thing we can do as a consultancy is to share our knowledge and help build, help the community grow knowledge and skills as much as we possibly can.
That's great, David. Thank you. Thanks for answering that. I am tempted to ask you how you would go about working with Jade and what she's trying to do with the OU, but perhaps you two can get together and have that conversation a bit later, because we do have another question, and this one is for Anna. This is another one from Mike, and he asks, so this is for you, Anna. Do you also regard driverless cars as robots with similar issues?
Again, sorry. Sorry, I didn't understand.
So Mike is asking, do you also regard driverless cars as robots?
Oh, yeah,
Similar issues.
I'm not sure if I understood the question, but sorry again.
I guess the question is, how do you consider driverless cars in the context in relation to the work that you're doing with robots? What sort of comparisons are there, perhaps?
Well, yeah, and when we're driving the cars, yeah, that's a good question. Thank you, Mike, for it. Yeah. When we're driving the cars, the robots, is quite difficult because, of course, you need to take into account how the people is moving around. I don't know if this is the answer. I understood the question properly. Andy, maybe you can help me with it. So it's related to how we are taking how we are making that decision on how the robot is behaving when there is people around, right? Yeah. So we were making a lot of decision when I was in Texas, because we tried to do something similar that people usually do when we find we are working in a crowded environment with people, with blind people, blind people working on a blank stick around. So the idea is to try to do something similar to what people usually doing, because we were trying to learn that through machine learning techniques. So that was what we were doing, using machine learning techniques to learn how other people usually behave with blind people around. I don't know if I understand. I am answering your question.
No, that's fine, Anna. Thank you.
I'm so sorry.
No, that's fine. We have just got a minute or so now, so we do have a quick question for Jade from Wei-Chin. She says, I appreciate the work in promoting digital accessibility among staff in the Open University. What measures have been taken to motivate faculty to engage in digital accessibility in their already stressful everyday activities, I guess?
Okay, I did see the question and I've written some notes to try and keep this short, but I could go on about it for days. We've got a few things, but I think the three biggest ones, we're building a community that's really supportive and safe and encouraging for people to be able to ask and answer questions. It doesn't always have to be people from my team who jump in with the answers. We also put a lot of work into promoting our guidance, promoting it, but also making it easy to use. For example, we'll often create materials and then we'll iterate based on feedback from the people who are using our guidance and resources. And we've conducted user testing and a usability review of our guidance that we provide to staff. And this is all with the aim of making it easy for people to find the information that they need. They haven't got all day to trawl the intranet with documents from 2008 that haven't been taken down. They want what they need, they want to find it quickly, and they want to be able to use it. So I'm hoping that goes some way to supporting faculty staff, and I'm taking faculty staff really broadly here, those academics and the kind of professional staff as well. They're the big ones, but of course there are so many initiatives that we have already underway which help embed accessibility into our career development and training, and there's so much going on, but I think they're the big ones from my perspective.
Thank you, Jade. That's great. So we have run out of time. So just a huge thanks to David and Jade and Anna for joining us today and contributing to a fascinating panel.